Check this.
Hello, this is Socially Triggered, and this video is going to be on fascism. There's a lot of talk about fascism, that there's a rise of fascism within the US, and it's been inspired by this whole kind of Trump narrative where they see him as this fascist dictator guy. And in order to understand what fascism is, it's really important to understand where it lies on the political spectrum. So often it is associated with the far right. And this might not actually be an accurate representation. And I'll get into that later. But for now, let's just explain what the political spectrum really is. It's this left-right narrative that we always hear. The left is usually associated with an emphasis on ideas of equality, fraternity, rights, progress, reform, internationalizationism, while the right is usually has this association with capitalism, the idea that there's order, right-wing politics would hold that certain social orders and hierarchies are inevitable, so the opposite of equality in that respect, natural, normal, or desirable, typically supporting this position on the basis of natural law, economics, or tradition. So they believe that things are not necessarily equal, and that we're all different within the whole societal structure, and that there's like going to be hierarchies within that structure. And some people will be at the top, some people will be at the bottom. The left is much more egalitarian in the way it thinks. It wants maybe a distribution of wealth where it's more socialist. You will hear that as you go more left, you're more socialist in the way you think. So that's the typical difference between left-wing thinking and right-wing thinking. Now, where does fascism fit into that kind of picture? Well, the other point of view to understand is conservatism. Trump would kind of fit into that conservative narrative. The conservatives hold political views that favor free enterprise, private ownership, and socially conservative ideas. So religious, strong family unit, that kind of thing. So these are typically conservative views. And conservatives would be considered right-wing. Now, to understand fascism, one more thing you have to understand is who actually created it. Now, the one that actually came up with the philosophy of fascism was an Italian man named Giovanni Gentile. Now, Gentile, he saw that there was two options for democracy. He saw that there was a liberal democracy, and for him, the liberal democracy was idealistic, individualistic. It was too centered around liberty and personal rights, and therefore was selfish. So that's typically, those would be kind of very right-wing ideas, that he believed that these right-wing ideas of personal freedom and individual rights, individualism, these were very right-wing things. He was very against that. Gentile hated those things. Instead, he wanted true democracy. And for him, true democracy was when individuals were willing to submit themselves to the state. And to understand this, Gentile was really a follower of Marx. Now, under Marx, you have this hierarchy system where the capitalists are at the top and all the working class are downtrodden and pushed below them. And Marx saw that there would be a revolution, that eventually the working class would overtake this capitalist class that was dominating over them. Well, Gentile saw something a little differently. He saw this structure based on countries and nationality, that the state in his political system was the ultimate controller, and it should be the ultimate controller. So if you look at socialism, mostly it involves state ownership of the means of production. So Marx is very strong into the concept of means of production. And for Marx, the way you achieve it is to have the workers control the means of production. And that what happens is you create a utopia by having the workers become the government. Everybody has equal representation in the government, and it's like just one big collective government that everyone's part of, and therefore, and everybody controls everything. Everybody owns everything. There's no individual private ownership. Whereas under Gentile's fascist idea, it's similar, but it's the state, it's the country that controls everything. It's a very nationalistic point of view, that the nation controls everything. Now, generally, if you look at a communist state or a socialist state, well, it's almost the same as that, because what ends up happening is the government of the country ends up controlling everything. And it's really just a state control of everything. And that's usually where it kind of goes all bad. Look at Venezuela, for example. So Gentile was inspired by the socialist teachings of Marx, who mobilizes people on the basis of class. Fascism mobilizes people under the basis of nationality. So it's a very nationalistic philosophy. Now, Gentile believed that the importance of the nation state, which is probably the main reason people associate fascism with the right, because generally the right is much more nationalistic, whereas the left is much more globalistic in the way it thinks. It thinks of open borders and these kind of globalist ways of thinking. However, the right is more correctly associated with individual rights and limited government. So as you go more and more right, the right actually wants more and more freedom, especially economic freedom. If you're a capitalist, you want as little government involvement as possible. So as you go more right, you actually want less and less government. Whereas fascism seeks the opposite. It seeks complete control over everything. The state controls everything. The state owns everything. The people submit to the state. This is very opposite of right-wing philosophy. And it's much more in tune with the Marxist and socialist view where it actually came from. So fascists are basically socialists with a national identity. And if you look at the Nazi Party, it really bears this out, where it was nationalist socialist, National Socialists, which became Nazi. And the Nazi Party really brought nationalism to the socialist movement. And the way I like to think of Nazis and fascists is kind of like Islam. Now, Islam have the Sunnis and the Shia. They're almost the same. They're the same religion, but they're two opposing factions. They have different beliefs to a certain extent. And it's really based on who was the earliest religious leader. And because of that, they have two different beliefs of the same religion. Well, fascism and Marxism are really just two groups within the socialist movement that actually fight it out. They fight with each other, just like the Islamic groups do, and they see themselves as opposites of each other, even though they're very, very similar. So fascism is a very left-wing philosophy, and it's incorrectly labeled as right-wing, because that way people can be propagandized that the right wing is evil. And it's a false narrative, because if you look at right-wing ways of thinking, it's limited government. And fascism is the exact opposite. It's very totalitarian state kind of government. So, is fascism a right-wing or a left-wing philosophy? Well, the modern left has rejected the idea of nationalism in favor of globalism. However, their goal would be a one world government with open borders between existing nations. Often you would see cries for the left demanding the end of all borders or no nationalism. I would suggest the modern left are modern fascists, where the state is the world government. They might not realize that this is their aim, but it is the consequence of their beliefs. Open borders, no more nations, and socialism where the government seeks to redistribute wealth. Look at the modern left's calls for socialism and the hatred of capitalism. Capitalism relies on individual freedom and the protection of private property. Socialists see capitalism as evil and private property as unfair. Socialism is anti-individualism, and it's pro-collectivism. Under socialism, the state must be the protector of the people. The state decides everything for them. That's also the way it exists under fascism. The right sees personal freedom and lives by the philosophy that one must look out for themselves. They don't want the nanny state. They want the opposite. They want almost very limited government, very little government involvement. This self-reliance in the right would need to be crushed, as Gentile, the person that created fascism, would say, because it is too selfish. The individualism of the right, the way the right people think, right-wing people think, is too individualistic. And Gentile, the guy that created fascism, would have hated this. He hated individualism. He wanted everybody to be under one state rule. Well, the modern left seeks, instead of the state being one nation, it seeks this global state that controls everything. Everybody is under this one umbrella, one world order. So, the modern left are fascists, basically. And they act as past fascists have acted. When the Nazi Party was in power, what it would do in order to rally its group is it would demonize, it would pick a demon group, a group that it could scapegoat. And it basically picked the Jews. And it said the Jews are evil, the Jews are the ones causing all the problems, the Jews control all the money, the Jews have killed our country, and they made it as if the Jews were the ones that were all the problems were created from. Now, the modern left does the exact same thing. But instead of the Jews, it is now white men. White men create the patriarchy. White men are the colonizers. White men enslave the blacks. It's the narrative that they use to demonize a group in order to rally people around this fascistic way of thinking. Now, they don't call it fascism, obviously, because everyone has that association with Hitler, but it's a modern form of fascism. It's a globalism-based fascism. It's an interesting version of it. It's the same philosophy, though, at the end, because it's the idea that it's those evil people that have everything, and we have to take it from them and redistribute it to everybody. And that's socialism. But fascism and socialism are basically the same thing. It's just that fascism takes socialism and adds this national aspect, or in the case of modern fascists, this globalist viewpoint. So this has been my explanation of fascism, the modern fascism. I hope you've enjoyed it. I'd like to hear your opinions about it. There's so much more that I could go into on it. Like the freedom of speech is pitched by the right nowadays, and the left is pitching that we have to have control over speech. And you'll notice that there's so many things about the left nowadays that really remind us of how the Nazis acted and the past fascists in history acted. So it's not that extreme to make the statement that the modern left are the modern fascists. So I hope you enjoyed this video. Please check out my other videos, and thanks for listening. Bye.